I just got chills thinking about it because I probably never got the chance to tell my full story with this. It was very frustrating, but our trainer came up to me about 6 months after I was struggling with ongoing, and I'll get to the details here in a second, and he told me, Court, I think I should tell you that I think something went wrong in your procedure.
You've also somewhat described your professional career as, quote, a disaster. What does that mean?
Yeah, I do consider my career as a disaster, and a lot of it had to do with injuries, more importantly, fluke injuries. This was the frustrating thing, and I think hindsight's everything. Looking back, I'm like, soccer wasn't my purpose. This was leading me to open a different door. But to backtrack, I would probably say my rookie year was the only year that I just got to enjoy the sport and enjoy where I was at. It was awesome. I was MVP. I was fan favorite. I was getting all these awards. It was just awesome. And then going into year two, preseason game, I hyperextended my knee, and which is no big deal. It was a grade 2, right? They're like, Court, you're going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. At that point in time, it was my first injury ever. I thought 4 to 6 weeks sounded like the worst thing on the planet. So it was a MCL, PCL sprain, grade 2, 4 to 6 weeks. And I'll never, ever, ever forget, after about a week going into the training room, I was laying on my stomach on the treatment table, and I could not pull my heel to my butt. Very simple task. Couldn't do it. And they brought the team doctors in, and they're like, Court, what's going on? Like, you didn't have a significant injury. Why can't you pull your leg up? And they were like, they did all these tests on my hamstrings. Couldn't figure it out. Long story short, the team doctor at the time said, hey, maybe it just scarred down over that peroneal nerve a little bit different, and that's why it's pinching. Maybe that's why you can't do it. I said, okay, doc, like, what are my options? They said, well, we can go and stabilize your tib fib. That's about a 10.5-month recovery. Or we could go out and clean the scar tissue out from around your peroneal nerve. That's a 2 to 3 day recovery. I was like, okay, like what are the cons of the second option? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Like, duh. And they're like, yeah, there's no real risks. They're like, if it doesn't work, then obviously we can make it through this season and go ahead and do the tib fib stabilization in the off season. I said, okay, all right, let's do it. Worst decision of my life. So something went wrong. I just got chills thinking about it because I probably never got the chance to tell my full story with this. It was very frustrating, but our trainer came up to me about 6 months after I was struggling with ongoing, and I'll get to the details here in a second, and he told me, Court, I think I should tell you that I think something went wrong in your procedure. And I'll never forget the day. His face just turned pale white. And it was almost like he was going to be in trouble for telling me, right? He was going behind the team doctor's back, And I said, Sean, what do you think? Like, what do you mean? Like, what did you see? And he went into some details about, something falling out of my knee onto the floor, like the doctor looking sketchy. Like, the details don't matter. But he was, for what I saw in his face, he was certain that something went wrong. Long story short, my knee ended up filling up with 300 cc's of fluid per week laterally. Nobody could figure out why. We went to Germany, we went to Vail, we went to the Stedman Clinic, we went to Minnesota, we went to the Mayo Clinic. All the best surgeons, doctors in the world could not figure out why. Believe it or not, it was the first case in American literature. It was actually the second, but the only time it had happened prior was upper body extremity. All right. So it was the first time in American literature that this has ever happened below the waist to somebody. And that was me. And so talk about a disaster. It went on for 3 years. I was very, very, very fortunate that I was under contract those whole 3 years. But I did not play a game, and I missed 3 consecutive years of my career because of a fluke, something that was a 2 to 3 day recovery, no risks, and I couldn't play. So I had no structural damage in my knee whatsoever. No structural damage, 0. Didn't blow out my knee, no ACL reconstruction, no nothing. And I missed 3 years of my career. The thing that's frustrating to me is that I couldn't tell my story. right? If I told a story, then Major League Soccer gets mad because they're the people that hired the team doctor, right? The team doctors are employed by the league and not by the team.
You were forced to provide top cover to the team that hurt you.
In some ways, yeah, right? Because if I make noise about it, if I go try to sue, for example, then I'm suing the league and not the doctor. Who's going to win that battle? I think everybody knows, right? So I was forced at that time to just keep my mouth shut. I had the coaches that reach out to me. They're like, Court, keep your mouth shut. And I missed 3 years of my career, and all the fans, I would read stuff on Twitter. Oh, Courtney's injury prone this, injury prone that. Nobody knew that I had nothing structurally wrong with me. And the only reason I couldn't play was because of a mishap and a surgery. So that was that. So that's the first disaster at the start of my career.
Can I interrupt? Can we drill in a little bit further on that? What's your headspace? What's your mental status going through that and not being able to respond and not being healthy enough to play?
Yeah, so fortunately, it was right smack dab in the middle of COVID. This was so important because if it wasn't, I probably would have retired then. But it was in the middle of COVID. And I mean in the middle, right? So if it was 3 years, like the major COVID year was in the middle of that, of me missing out, right? So during that time, I didn't feel like I was missing out, right? We couldn't play games. Like you couldn't socialize. You couldn't go out and hang out with your friends, with your teammates. There's no social component of it. They had to go to Orlando to get their games in. So I didn't feel like I was missing out, right? But I do remember before coming back from COVID, that first year, I told Robin Frazier, he was the coach at the time, I was like, I can't hop on these Zoom calls with the team. I was like, I don't want to talk about tactics, right? I don't want to talk about the shape that we're playing, how we're beating teams when there's no vision for me of how I can get back on the field. So fortunately, he was just very accepting of it. So I was removed from it. So when you think about it, it was basically like 3 years of vacation. Hindsight's everything. Look back, that's probably an extra 3 years that I had to spend with my mom, right, that I wouldn't have had prior to her passing. So not a lot of frustration, to be honest. When I was in it, like I kind of told you, I think something that's very interesting about me is I was kind of stone cold about everything. It didn't impact me. Nothing impacted me until I ruptured my Achilles. So it was just one of those things that I was just like, it's just life, and I dealt with it. So the naivety in me was actually helped me big time.
How did it resolve? I assume your knee's doing better now.
Yeah, good question. So the Mayo Clinic, we ended up going back for a second time, and they ended up just doing an exploratory surgery. They said, Court, we have no idea what we're going to go in there and try to do. We're just going to go in there and laser off everything that we can find, right? Like everything, right? Because they couldn't find the leak, right? That's what was happening for 3 years. Obviously, 300 cc's of fluid of leak. They couldn't find where the leak was coming from. And it worked, right? It worked. So the exploratory surgery worked. Shortly after I started playing again, it wasn't a big onset. I could just start playing again, right? Like I said, there was no rehab needed. I was already strong. I was already lifting. The only reason I couldn't play is because I had a bulging water bottle of fluid hanging out the side of my knee, right? So after they fixed it, I was back almost immediately. Yeah. And I ended up going on loan with San Antonio FC.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, most people don't. So a lot of times when you're either not playing or you're coming back from injury, you'll go on loan for another team.
Okay.
You can go on loan to another team in the MLS. That's rare because obviously they don't want you playing against your team. Right. But what is common is that you would go on loan to completely another league, right? Okay. So at that time, I went on loan to the USL, right, which is the league right below Major League Soccer. And I believe I was there for 2 months. I think we played 12 games. And very humbly saying, I balled, right? I was center back. I scored like 6 goals in a very short amount of time. We never lost. We didn't lose until the Final Four for them. So that obviously helped. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like, where has Kortne Ford been? And at that point in time, Sporting KC, they reached out, offered me a contract, and then I signed here. So that kind of brings us back to Kansas City, and that was kind of the end of an era there in Colorado.